The morning of the settlement meeting, I wore my mother's pearl earrings, not because I wanted to look nice, because she would have wanted me to walk in there with my head up. That's what she always said, head up, Claire, even when everything hurts. And everything had been hurting for about 3 years by then. My brother Trevor had no idea I was coming. That's the part I need you to understand first. He thought I was still the same person I was after Mom died, scattered, grieving, easy to push around. He thought I'd signed everything he put in front of me without reading it. He was almost right. Almost. I'll back up. My mother, Patricia Ann Holloway, died on a Thursday in March. Pancreatic cancer. 7 weeks from diagnosis to gone. That's how fast that disease moves, and that's how little time we had to say anything real to each other. I was living 40 minutes away, working as a hospital billing coordinator, driving over every single night after my shift to sit with her. Trevor lived 12 minutes from her house. He showed up twice in those 7 weeks. Both times, he brought his girlfriend and stayed less than an hour. Mom's estate wasn't complicated on paper. The house, which was paid off, worth about $340,000 in that market. A life insurance policy for $150,000. A small investment account with around $80,000. A storage unit full of furniture and jewelry she'd been collecting for 30 years. She'd written a will, a real one, notarized. Done with an attorney named Mr. Aldridge who had an office on Clement Street downtown. She left everything split equally between me and Trevor, with one condition: the house could not be sold for 12 months to give either of us time to buy the other one out if we wanted to keep it in the family. I wanted to keep it. I grew up in that house. My mother planted rose bushes in the front yard the year I was born. I wanted to buy Trevor out, live there, and spend the rest of my life making sure those roses didn't die. I told Trevor this the week after the funeral. He looked at me across Mom's kitchen table, the same table we'd eaten breakfast at for 20 years, and said, "We'll figure it out." That was in March. By April, he had filed paperwork claiming he held durable power of attorney over the estate. I didn't even know what that meant at first. I had to look it up, and what I found made my stomach drop. A durable power of attorney, if valid, would give him authority to manage assets, sign documents, make financial decisions. Except my mother had been mentally competent until the very last week of her life. Except I had never heard her mention giving Trevor any such authority. Except Mr. Aldridge, her actual attorney, had never mentioned it either. I called Mr. Aldridge's office. His assistant told me he was on medical leave. She couldn't tell me for how long. I called Trevor. He didn't answer. He texted back 2 hours later. POA was something Mom and I discussed privately. You'll see a copy at the settlement meeting. That was the first time I felt it. Not grief, not confusion. Fear. Cold, specific fear. The kind that lives in your chest and doesn't leave. I drove to Mom's house that weekend. Trevor had already changed the locks. I stood on the porch where I'd learned to ride a bike, and I looked at my mother's rose bushes and I thought, he is going to take everything. And then I thought, unless I do something. I wasn't a lawyer. I wasn't an investigator. I was a billing coordinator at a regional hospital, which meant I knew one thing extremely well: how to read financial documents and find the line that doesn't match. So that's what I started doing. Trevor had always been careless in a particular way, smart enough to be dangerous, but too arrogant to cover his tracks. He used the same email address for everything. He'd had the same phone password, our childhood street address, since 2015. And I knew it because he'd asked me to check something on his phone once at Christmas and just handed it to me unlocked. I didn't hack anything. I want to be clear about that. What I did was go back through every piece of paper Mom had ever mailed me, every email she'd forwarded, every photograph of documents she'd texted me when she needed help understanding something. My mother had trusted me with her paperwork for years. Tax forms, medical bills, insurance renewals. She sent me photos of everything. It was just how we worked. Going through all of it took me 3 weekends. I made a spreadsheet. I printed everything. I put it in a binder with tabs. What I found was this. 9 months before my mother died, when she was still healthy, still driving herself to yoga on Tuesday mornings, Trevor had convinced her to open a joint brokerage account with him. He'd told her it was for easier transfer of assets after she passed. The account started with $40,000 she transferred from her personal savings. By the time she died, it had $4,200 in it. I found the statements because Mom had forwarded me a confirmation email when the account was opened, the way she always forwarded me financial emails she didn't fully understand. She'd written in the subject line, "Trevor set this up. Is this okay?" I had responded at the time that it looked fine, that joint accounts were common in estate planning. I hadn't looked closely enough. I hadn't known to look closely. Now I looked closely. Now I looked closely. The withdrawals were consistent. Every 6 to 8 weeks between $3,000 and $8,000, always transferred to the same external account ending in 4471. I didn't know whose account that was, but I knew it wasn't my mother's. She only had two checking accounts and I had the numbers for both of them. There was more. Mom had a storage unit she'd rented for 12 years, full of furniture she'd inherited from her own mother. Antique pieces, a secretary desk, a set of dining chairs, some jewelry. I'd been to that storage unit dozens of times. After she died, I went to check on it. The lock had been changed. When I called the storage facility, they told me the account had been transferred to a new name in February, a month before Mom died, while she was in the hospital, and that the unit had been emptied 2 weeks after her death. The name on the account was a business, THK Property Solutions, LLC. Trevor's middle name is Harold. His girlfriend's last name is Kim. I sat in my car outside that storage facility for a long time. I didn't cry. I was past crying by then. I just sat there and thought about my grandmother's secretary desk, the one Mom had promised me since I was 12 years old, and I thought about where it probably was now, listed on some resale site for $800, and I made myself very calm and very focused. I called a lawyer. Not Mr. Aldrich. He was still on leave. I called a woman named Ms. Okonkwo, who had been recommended to me by a coworker whose family had gone through something similar. I told her everything. I brought her my binder. She went quiet for a long moment after I finished talking, and then she said, "The settlement meeting is in 3 weeks. We need to move fast." She filed a motion to contest the power of attorney on the grounds that no such document had been disclosed to the estate attorney of record, and that the signature on the document Trevor had produced did not match other authenticated samples of my mother's signature from the same period. She also filed a request to freeze the joint brokerage account pending investigation. Trevor's lawyer, a man named Mr. Shepard, whom I'd never met, called Ms. Okonkwo 2 days later and told her we were making unfounded accusations and that Trevor would be seeking legal fees if we proceeded. Ms. Okonkwo told him we'd see him at the meeting and hung up. I want to tell you about the 2 weeks between that phone call and the settlement meeting, because it wasn't dramatic. It was just quiet and exhausting. I went to work. I came home. I went through more documents. I called Mr. Dadazace Aldridge's office every few days, leaving messages, until finally on a Wednesday afternoon, someone called me back. It wasn't Mr. Aldridge. It was his son, who told me his father had suffered a stroke in January and was in rehabilitation. He told me this gently, like he knew it wasn't what I wanted to hear. And then he told me something else. He said his father had mentioned my mother's case before the stroke, that she had come in to see him in November, 4 months before she died, and that she had wanted to make changes to her estate documents, that she had been concerned about Trevor, that Mr. Aldrich had started drafting an amendment to her will, but that he had the stroke before it was finalized and the amendment was never executed. She had been trying to protect me. She just ran out of time. I thanked him. I hung up. I sat in my bathroom on the edge of the tub with the door closed, and I let myself cry for about 10 minutes. Not because I was sad. I was past sad. But because I missed her so much, it felt like something physical, like a weight on my sternum that never fully lifted. Then I washed my face and went back to the spreadsheet. The morning of the settlement meeting, I woke up at 5:30. I showered, I dressed, I put on the pearl earrings. I made coffee and stood at my window and thought about what my mother used to say. "You have always been the one who pays attention, Claire. That's your gift. Use it." I drove downtown. I had my binder. I had Ms. Okonkwo. And I had my Zinikongwo. And I had something else. 2 days before the meeting, I'd been walking to the parking garage near Ms. Okonkwo's office after a late appointment. It was drizzling, that kind of cold sidewalk drizzle that makes everything gray. There was a man sitting outside the parking garage entrance in a motorized wheelchair. He was older, maybe late 60s, wearing a raincoat that wasn't doing much against the wet. He was trying to reach something he'd dropped, a folder, thick with papers that had slid under the front wheel of his chair. I stopped and picked it up. He thanked me. We started talking the way you do when you're both standing in the rain and neither of you is in a hurry. He asked why I was downtown so late. I told him I was in a legal dispute. He nodded in a way that felt practiced, like he'd heard that phrase 10,000 times. I don't know why I kept talking. Maybe because I was tired of carrying it alone. And this stranger with kind eyes and a raincoat outside a parking garage felt safe in the way that strangers sometimes do. I told him the basic outline: my mother, the estate, my brother, the account ending in 4471. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Did your attorney contact the state bar about the power of attorney document?" I said I didn't think so. He said, "She should. If that document was fraudulently executed, the attorney who notarized it has a problem." I asked how he knew that. He handed me his business card. I looked at it in the drizzle. Then I looked at him. He was the presiding disciplinary officer of the State Bar Association. I must have looked stunned because he smiled and said, "I take the transit bus. It drops me on this corner." He gave me his direct number. He said to have my attorney call him before the meeting. Miss Okonkwo, when I told her, made a sound I'd never heard from her before. A short, sharp exhale, like someone who'd just drawn a very good card. She called him that night. I walked into the settlement meeting at 9 in the morning. The conference room was on the 14th floor of a building downtown with a view of the river. Trevor was already there with Mr. Shepherd. Trevor had cut his hair and was wearing a suit I didn't recognize. He looked confident. He looked like someone who had already decided how this was going to go. He looked at me. He nodded, the way you nod at someone you've already written off. He did not look at who was behind me. Miss Okonkwo entered first, then me, then the presiding disciplinary officer of the state bar in his motorized wheelchair with a folder in his lap. I watched Trevor's face. I have thought about that moment many times since. The way his expression changed, not all at once, but in pieces, like something structural giving way slowly. He knew who that man was. Of course he did. Mr. Shepherd knew too. I watched Mr. Shepherd knew too. Shepherd, look at his client, then look at the man in the wheelchair, then look back at his notes. And I knew in that moment that Mr. Shepherd was doing math in his head. The kind of math that ends with him no longer being Trevor's biggest supporter in the room. The meeting took 4 hours. The power of attorney document was examined. A forensic document analyst, Ms. Okonkwo, had retained gave a preliminary assessment. The signature on the POA did not match authenticated samples of my mother's signature from the same 6-month period. 2 samples that Trevor had provided as proof of her handwriting were themselves of disputed origin. Mr. Shepherd asked for a recess after the first hour. During the recess, he had a private conversation with Ms. Okonkwo that I was not part of. When we resumed, his posture had changed entirely. He stopped objecting to things. Trevor, for the first time in my entire memory, had nothing to say. The joint brokerage account, the one with $4,200 left from an original $40,000, was subpoenaed. The external account ending in 4471 was traced. It belonged to THK Property Solutions, LLC, which was, as I had suspected, a company registered to Trevor Harold Holloway and Christina Helen Kim, incorporated 8 months before my mother died. He had been planning it while she was still healthy, while she was still going to yoga on Tuesday mornings, while she still thought her son was going to look out for her. The storage unit contents, or what could still be located, were inventoried. Some pieces had already been sold. Some were recovered. The secretary desk, the one my grandmother had left my mother, the one promised to me since I was 12, it had been listed on an online marketplace 3 weeks after Mom died, sold for $650. I didn't cry when they told me that. I had made my peace with it. Things are things. The desk was never really what I was fighting for. By the end of the meeting, Trevor's attorney had negotiated what amounted to a full capitulation, dressed up in legal language to sound like a mutual resolution. The power of attorney document was withdrawn. Trevor's claim to sole authority over the estate was dismissed. The estate was to be administered by a neutral third-party executor, not Mr. Aldridge's firm and not anyone Trevor had proposed, someone the court would appoint. The funds that could be traced from the joint account would be returned to the estate. Trevor would face a separate civil action for the storage unit contents, and the notary who had certified the power of attorney document, a notary who, it turned out, shared office space with Mr. Shepherd's firm, was now the subject of a state bar inquiry. That part was the presiding disciplinary officer's domain, not mine. He handled it quietly, and I never heard the details. But I know what happened, because 3 months later, Mr. Shepard's firm dissolved. Trevor didn't speak to me after the meeting. He walked out ahead of everyone else without looking back. I watched him go, and I felt not satisfaction exactly, something more like exhaustion. And underneath the exhaustion, something solid, like finding ground under your feet after a long time of not being sure it was there. Miss Okonkwo shook my hand in the elevator. She said, "You built a good case." I told her my mother had kept good records, and that it turned out I had too. The house closed to me 90 days later. I bought Trevor's half at a fair market assessment. He didn't negotiate, just took the number and signed. I moved in on a Saturday in July. The rose bushes had gotten overgrown during the months the house sat empty. I spent 2 weekends in August cutting them back, learning what I was doing from YouTube videos, and a woman at the nursery down the street who knew my mother and cried a little when I told her I was the one living there now. They came back the following spring. Pale pink, just like always. There's something I want to say to anyone who's been in a room where someone with more confidence and more lawyers and more apparent authority has looked at you like you're already finished. Like the outcome is settled and you just haven't been told yet. Pay attention. Read everything. Keep records. Ask questions even when you don't know what you're asking yet. And if someone drops something in the rain, stop and pick it up. You never know who's sitting in that chair. I've thought a lot about why Trevor did what he did. Not to excuse it. There's no version of this where emptying your dying mother's savings account is understandable. But I've thought about it because I think understanding how people become capable of something like that matters more than just labeling them as bad and moving on. Trevor wasn't a monster when we were kids. He was just the one who always felt like he deserved more than he had. Every Christmas, every birthday, every time Mom praised something I did, I could see it in him, that small tightening around the eyes. He was never satisfied. And I think somewhere along the way, that dissatisfaction curdled into something worse, into the belief that the rules other people followed didn't really apply to him. That being clever enough to take something was the same as deserving it. That's not karma in any mystical sense. That's just what happens when a person spends years practicing a certain way of thinking. You get good at what you practice. Trevor practiced entitlement for 30 years, and he got very good at it. Good enough to look his sick mother in the face and set up a joint account to drain while she was still going to yoga on Tuesday mornings. The mind that does that didn't arrive there overnight. It walked there, slowly, one small compromise at a time. And I practiced something too, without knowing it. Every time my mother sent me a financial email she didn't understand, and I helped her figure it out, I was building something. Every time I read a document carefully instead of skimming it, I was building something. Attention is a skill, and I had been training mine for years without a name for what I was doing. When I needed it most, it was there. That's the part I want to say clearly. I didn't win because the universe intervened. I won because I paid attention when it would have been easier not to, because I kept records when I was exhausted and grieving and just wanted it to be over, because I asked one more question, made one more phone call, opened one more envelope, and because on a drizzling Wednesday evening, I stopped for 30 seconds to pick up something a stranger had dropped. That last part sounds like luck. Maybe it was. But I also think that people who are paying attention, really paying attention to the world around them and the people in it, tend to encounter more of those moments. Not because fate rewards them, because they're actually looking. The rose bushes are blooming again this spring, pale pink, just like always. I sit on the porch sometimes in the morning with coffee, and I think about my mother planting them the year I was born, and I think about how she spent the last months of her life trying to protect me through a document that never got finished. She ran out of time, but she had tried. She had been paying attention to Trevor, to the situation, to what needed to be done, and that effort, even unfinished, left a trail I could follow. What I learned from all of this isn't a lesson you can fit on a card. It's more like a posture. Stay awake. Read the fine print. Trust the discomfort that tells you something is wrong even before you can name it. And when someone near you drops something in the rain, stop. Not because it will always lead somewhere, but because it's the right way to move through the world. And the right way, practiced long enough, tends to build something that holds.